My sister Victoria laughed in my face and called my wedding ring a cheap knockoff from Amazon in front of my entire family at Thanksgiving dinner. She demanded I stop embarrassing myself by wearing obvious costume jewelry and suggested I return it before my fiancé realized I'd been lying about its value. What she didn't know was that my fiancé Marcus owned the most exclusive jewelry house in Beverly Hills, and his master jeweler was already on his way to our family dinner with documentation that would make Victoria's face go whiter than her overpriced Botox. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Elena Richardson, and what started as a quiet Thanksgiving at my parents' colonial house in Westfield, Connecticut, ended with appraisals, authenticity certificates, and my sister discovering that sometimes the quiet daughter has the loudest secrets. The invitation had arrived 3 weeks before Thanksgiving, written in my mother's perfect cursive on cream-colored cardstock that probably cost more per sheet than most people's lunch. Annual Hartwell Family Thanksgiving, traditional gathering at the estate, formal attire requested, RSVP by November 15th. Even the invitation reminded me why I'd moved 3,000 miles away to Seattle after college. Everything in the Hartwell family had to be perfect, traditional, and most importantly, under my mother Catherine's complete control. I'd been tempted to decline, as I had for the past 2 years, but this time was different. This time, I was bringing Marcus. I stared at the invitation while sitting in my downtown Seattle apartment, a converted loft with exposed brick walls and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Puget Sound. The space was everything my childhood home wasn't: modern, minimalist, and completely my own. My laptop sat open on the reclaimed wood table showing the quarterly reports for the nonprofit organization I'd built from scratch, helping underprivileged women start small businesses. It wasn't glamorous work by Westfield standards, but it had given me purpose when I'd felt lost. Marcus found me there, an hour later, still holding the invitation and wearing the expression he'd learned to recognize as my family stress face. "The annual command performance?" he asked, settling beside me on the charcoal sectional that had been my first major purchase when I'd finally started earning enough to buy furniture instead of inheriting it. "My mother wants to meet you," I said, leaning into his familiar warmth. After 8 months together, Marcus Chen had become my safe harbor in ways I was still discovering. Fair warning, they're going to be intense. Marcus laughed, the sound rich and easy. At 34, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who'd built something from nothing and never felt the need to announce it. His family had immigrated from Taiwan when he was 12, and he'd worked his way through USC Business School before revolutionizing the luxury jewelry industry with sustainable practices and ethically sourced stones. "How intense are we talking?" he asked, tracing patterns on my palm. "Meet the boyfriend intense? Or FBI background check intense?" I replied, "FBI background check, financial audit, and character witness testimony intense. My sister Victoria will definitely Google you the moment you get your last name. My mother will ask about your family's background, your education, your 5-year plan, and probably your credit score. My father will want to discuss your business philosophy and whether you understand the importance of tradition." "And what do you want?" Marcus asked, the question he always came back to. In my family, what I wanted was always secondary to what was expected, what looked appropriate, what maintained the family image. But Marcus had spent months teaching me that my desires mattered, that my voice deserved to be heard. "I want them to see how happy you make me," I said honestly. "I want them to understand that I've built a life I'm proud of, even if it doesn't look like what they planned for me." The truth was, my family had never understood my choices. When I'd turned down the marketing position at my father's pharmaceutical company, my mother had spent 6 months introducing me at social events as taking a gap year to find herself. When I'd moved to Seattle instead of staying in Connecticut, Victoria had publicly wondered if I was going through some kind of phase. Victoria had always been the golden child. Harvard MBA, investment banking career, marriage to Thornton Whitfield III at 26, perfectly appointed house in Greenwich with 2 children that attended the right schools and played the right sports. She was everything my parents had envisioned for both their daughters, and my divergence from that path had always felt like a personal affront to the family image. "Tell me about Victoria," Marcus said, recognizing the shadow that crossed my face whenever I mentioned my sister. I pulled up her most recent Instagram post on my phone, a perfectly staged photo of their family's fall photo shoot, everyone dressed in cream and navy, standing in front of their mansion's circular driveway. Victoria looked flawless as always, her blonde hair blown out to perfection, wearing what I recognized as a designer dress that cost more than most people's rent. "She looks exhausting," he explained.
That's actually the perfect word for her. Victoria doesn't just have opinions about her own life, she has opinions about everyone else's life too, and she's never shy about sharing them. When I got my first job out of college, she spent the entire family dinner explaining why nonprofit work was adorable but impractical. When I told them I was moving to Seattle, she gave a presentation about why the Pacific Northwest was too isolating for someone with my personality. "And now you're bringing home a boyfriend she knows nothing about," Marcus observed. "Now I'm bringing home a boyfriend who makes me laugh every day, who supports my work without trying to change it, and who proposed with the most beautiful ring I've ever seen," I said, looking down at my left hand. The ring still took my breath away every time I noticed it. Marcus had proposed 3 months ago during a weekend trip to the San Juan Islands, getting down on one knee at sunset on a secluded beach where we'd been the only people for miles. The ring was a masterpiece, a 3-carat oval diamond set in platinum with smaller diamonds cascading down the band in an organic, almost vine-like pattern. It caught light in ways that seemed impossible, throwing tiny rainbows across any surface when the sun hit it just right. "Are you nervous about them meeting me or about them seeing the ring?" Marcus observed perceptively. I considered the question. Both, I think. The ring it's obviously expensive, and my family has very specific ideas about what's appropriate, what's too flashy, what sends the right message. Victoria especially has opinions about jewelry. She'll definitely notice it, and she'll definitely have something to say about it. What kind of something? I thought about Victoria's track record of commentary on my choices. If it's too expensive, she'll say I'm being frivolous and impractical. If it's not expensive enough, she'll say Marcus doesn't value me appropriately. If it's too modern, she'll say it doesn't suit my personality. If it's too traditional, she'll say I'm trying too hard to fit in. There's literally no version of this ring that will escape her critique. Marcus was quiet for a moment, and I recognized the expression on his face, the same one he wore when he was solving complex problems in his workshop, when he was designing a piece that had to be perfect because someone's love story depended on it. "Elena, there's something about the ring that I haven't told you." My stomach dropped slightly. "What kind of something?" "Nothing bad," he said quickly, seeing my expression. "It's just, the ring didn't come from a regular jewelry store. I designed it myself in my own workshop. And the center stone..." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "It's from a very exclusive collection. One that most jewelers would recognize immediately." "How exclusive are we talking?" "The kind of exclusive where there's documentation, certificates, a complete provenance record. The kind where the original purchase price is substantial." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. "Marcus, how substantial?" "Substantial enough that if anyone questions its authenticity, I can have my master jeweler provide documentation that would end the conversation permanently." I stared at him, processing this information. Marcus had always been private about the financial details of his business, but I'd assumed that was normal caution from someone who'd worked hard for success. Now I was beginning to wonder if there were layers to his world that I hadn't fully understood. Are you saying my ring is worth more than I think it is? I'm saying your ring is worth exactly what it should be worth, which is everything, because that's what you're worth to me. But yes, if someone were to look it up in any jewelry database, they'd find some interesting information. The conversation was interrupted by my phone buzzing with a text from Victoria. Can't wait to meet the mysterious fiancé. Mom says you've been very secretive about him. Hope he's prepared for the full family experience. I showed Marcus the text, and he chuckled. The full family experience. That sounds ominous. You have no idea. But Marcus, about the ring, should I be worried about anything? About how they'll react? About questions they might ask? The only thing you should worry about, Marcus said, taking my hand and running his thumb over the diamond that caught the afternoon light streaming through our windows, is whether you're ready for your family to finally see you the way I see you. Because once they understand what this ring represents, once they see the documentation of what it actually is, they're going to have to reckon with the fact that their idea of who you are might be completely wrong. As we booked our flights to Connecticut the next day, I found myself wondering if I was ready for that reckoning. I had spent so many years being the disappointing daughter, the one who made impractical choices and needed gentle correction. The idea that I might walk into my childhood home as someone who commanded respect instead of pity was thrilling and terrifying. What I didn't know was that Victoria was already planning her own reckoning, and in 3 weeks, when we all gathered around my mother's perfectly appointed dining room table, she would discover that underestimating the quiet daughter was the biggest mistake she ever made.
The flight from Seattle to Bradley International Airport felt longer than usual, partly because Marcus spent most of it working on his laptop while I stared out the window, mentally preparing for 3 days in my childhood home. The closer we got to Connecticut, the more I felt myself shrinking back into old patterns. The careful daughter who measured her words, who anticipated criticism before it came. "You're doing that thing again," Marcus said without looking up from his screen. "What thing?" "The thing where you physically make yourself smaller when you think about your family. Your shoulders curl inward, you cross your arms defensively. You've done it 3 times since takeoff." I forced myself to sit up straighter. "Sorry, it's just being back there brings out old habits." "Don't apologize for having feelings about a difficult situation," Marcus said, closing his laptop and giving me his full attention. "But remember, you're not the same person who left Connecticut 5 years ago. You've built something incredible in Seattle. You've helped hundreds of women start their own businesses. You've created a life that makes you happy. Don't let them make you forget that." When we landed, my father was waiting in the arrivals area, exactly where he'd always waited when I came home from college. Robert Hartwell stood 6 feet tall in his navy wool coat and leather driving gloves, his silver hair perfectly styled, projecting the kind of understated authority that came from 3 generations of pharmaceutical company ownership. "Elena," he said, embracing me with the formal warmth that had always characterized our relationship. "You look well. Seattle seems to agree with you." "Thanks, Dad. This is Marcus Chen." I stepped back to make introductions, watching my father's expression carefully. Marcus extended his hand with a confident smile. "Mr. Hartwell, it's a pleasure to meet you. Elena's told me so much about your work in the pharmaceutical industry. The innovations your company has made in sustainable manufacturing are impressive." My father's eyebrows rose slightly. Clearly, he hadn't expected Marcus to be familiar with the technical aspects of his business. "You're in manufacturing yourself?" "Luxury goods," Marcus replied easily. "Different industry, but many of the same principles apply. Quality control, ethical sourcing, maintaining standards while scaling production." As we walked toward the car, I caught my father giving Marcus an appraising look that I recognized from childhood.
It was the same expression he'd worn when evaluating potential business partners, measuring, calculating, forming initial judgments that would influence every future interaction. The drive to Westfield took 40 minutes through Connecticut countryside that looked like something from a postcard, fall foliage in brilliant reds and golds, stone walls separating pristine properties, the kind of old money landscape where my family had been fixtures for over a century. Marcus gazed out the window with genuine appreciation, asking thoughtful questions about local history and the regional economy. "Your family has been here a long time," he observed as we passed the country club where I'd spent countless childhood summers. "4 generations," my father replied, warming slightly to the topic. "My great-grandfather bought the original property in 1924. We've been adding to it ever since." "That's remarkable. Elena mentioned you have strong ties to the community." "The Hartwells have always believed in civic responsibility," my father said, and I heard the subtle emphasis that meant this was a test. Local boards, charitable foundations, maintaining the institutions that make a community strong. "Absolutely," Marcus agreed. "Community investment is essential. Elena's work with women entrepreneurs has opened my eyes to how much impact you can have when you focus on grassroots development." I saw my father's hands tighten slightly on the steering wheel, the first sign that Marcus had said something unexpected. In my family's worldview, charity was important, but it was supposed to be gracious donations to establish institutions, not direct involvement with grassroots, anything. The Hartwell estate appeared around a curve in the road like something from a magazine spread. The main house was a Georgian colonial built in 1924 with symmetrical wings and perfectly proportioned windows that reflected the afternoon sun. The circular driveway was bordered by mature oak trees, and the front gardens showed the kind of meticulous maintenance that required a full-time staff. "Wow," Marcus said softly. "Elena, you didn't mention you grew up in a manor house." "It's just home," I replied automatically, then heard how dismissive that sounded of something Marcus was clearly impressed by. "I mean, yes, it's beautiful. I guess I stopped seeing it after a while." My mother appeared in the front doorway before we'd even parked, wearing the kind of outfit that looked effortlessly elegant, but probably had been planned for days. Catherine Hartwell had perfected the art of understated luxury. Cashmere sweater and soft gray, pearls that had belonged to her mother, wool pants tailored to fit perfectly. At 58, she maintained the same slender figure she'd had in college, and her dark hair was styled in a bob that never seemed to move, regardless of weather. "Elena, darling," she said, embracing me with the careful precision that ensured neither of our appearances would be disturbed. "And you must be Marcus. We're so pleased to finally meet you." Marcus accepted her hand with a slight bow that managed to be respectful without being obsequious. "Mrs. Hartwell, thank you for including me in your family celebration. Your home is extraordinary." "Oh, please call me Catherine. And thank you. We do love it here. Elena, you look wonderful. That color is perfect on you." She gestured toward my burgundy sweater, the same way she'd evaluated my appearance since childhood, always finding something to approve or adjust.
As we moved inside, I caught Marcus taking in details that I'd stopped noticing years ago. The Waterford crystal chandelier in the foyer, the Persian rugs that had been in the family for generations, the oil paintings of Hartwell ancestors watching from their gilded frames. Everything spoke of old money, established taste, the kind of wealth that never announced itself because it didn't need to. "Marcus owns a jewelry business in Beverly Hills," I offered as my mother led us toward the living room. "How interesting," Catherine replied, in the tone that meant she was filing away information for later analysis. "What kind of jewelry?" "High-end custom pieces, mostly. We work with clients who want something completely unique," Marcus said. "A lot of engagement rings, anniversary pieces, gifts for special occasions." "Like boutique work?" My mother nodded, and I caught the subtle classification happening. In her mental hierarchy, boutique meant small scale, probably struggling, definitely not serious business. "Something like that," Marcus agreed mildly. We were settling into the living room when I heard the sound of tires on gravel, followed by car doors slamming and the voices I'd been dreading since we'd booked our flights. "That'll be Victoria," my mother said with visible pleasure.
She's been so excited to meet you, Marcus. She and Thornton drove down from Greenwich this morning with the children. Through the front windows, I watched my sister emerge from her black Range Rover, like she was stepping onto a red carpet. Victoria Whitfield had perfected the art of looking effortlessly perfect in any situation. Today she wore a cream-colored wool coat that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary, her blonde hair blown out to television-ready perfection, despite the November wind. Thornton followed more slowly, helping their children, Madison 8 and Prescott 6, gather their overnight bags. He moved with the deliberate precision of someone who'd been trained from birth to never appear hurried or flustered, even when wrangling small children. "Uncle Robert!" Madison burst through the front door, her voice echoing through the foyer. "Grandma Catherine! Is Elena here? Is this her boyfriend?" Victoria appeared behind her children, taking in the scene with the sharp assessment that had always been her specialty. Her gaze swept over Marcus with undisguised curiosity, cataloging his appearance, his posture, the quality of his clothes. I saw her eyes linger on his watch, a simple omega that suggested success without ostentation. "Victoria," I said, standing to embrace my sister. "This is Marcus. Marcus, my sister Victoria, and her husband Thornton." "The mysterious fiancé," Victoria said with a smile that looked warm but felt calculating. "We've been dying to meet you. Elena's been so secretive about her Seattle life." Marcus stood to shake hands, his expression genuinely friendly. "Elena's told me wonderful things about all of you. Congratulations on your recent promotion. Elena mentioned you made senior vice president." Victoria's smile became more genuine. She'd always responded well to recognition of her achievements. "Thank you. Investment banking is challenging, but I love the strategy aspect. What about you?" Elena mentioned jewelry, but she was frustratingly vague about details. "I design and create custom pieces, mostly for private clients who want something completely unique for special occasions." "How romantic," Victoria said, but I caught the slight dismissiveness in her tone. In her world, unless you were managing other people's millions or running major corporations, you were playing in the minor leagues. "And you met Elena in Seattle?" "Through mutual friends," Marcus said easily. "Elena was consulting on a fundraising event for women entrepreneurs, and I was donating some pieces for the auction. Her passion for the cause was infectious." Victoria's eyes sharpened. "Fundraising. How nice that you're both involved in charity work." The way she said charity work made it sound like a hobby for people who didn't have real careers. I felt the familiar sting of condescension, but before I could respond, Marcus spoke up. "Elena's work is remarkable," he said, his voice carrying a note of genuine pride that made my chest warm. "She's helped over 300 women start sustainable businesses in the past 3 years. The economic impact of her programs is extraordinary." 300, my mother repeated, as if hearing this number for the first time. "Elena, you never mentioned the scope was so large." "It's grown pretty quickly," I said, uncomfortable with being the center of attention. "The need is bigger than I originally realized." "That's incredible," Thornton said, speaking up for the first time. "What kind of businesses?" As I began explaining the program, how we provided microloans, business training, and ongoing mentorship to women starting everything from catering companies to tech startups, I noticed Marcus watching my family's reactions carefully. My parents looked genuinely surprised by the scope and success of my work. Victoria's expression was harder to read, cycling between what looked like pride and something that might have been envy. "The success rate is remarkable," Marcus added. 87% of Elena's program graduates are still operating profitable businesses after 2 years. That's almost unheard of in small business development. "How do you know so much about Elena's work?" Victoria asked, her tone sharpening slightly. "Because I pay attention to what matters to the woman I love, and because I've seen firsthand how her programs change lives." The directness of his answer seems to catch Victoria off guard. She blinked once, then recovered her composure. "Of course, it's just nice to see someone so supportive of Elena's interests." The word interests hung in the air like a small insult. Not career or work or calling,
interests, as if my life's work was a casual hobby. I saw Marcus's jaw tighten almost imperceptibly, but his voice remained pleasant. Elena's work isn't an interest, it's a calling that happens to generate significant social and economic impact. I'm not supportive of it, I'm in awe of it.
The room went quiet for a moment. In 32 years of family gatherings, I couldn't remember anyone defending my choices so directly or so confidently. Victoria recovered first, her smile sliding back into place. "Well," she said brightly, "we'll have plenty of time to hear all about everyone's work over the next few days. Elena, that's a lovely ring. Very unique." She was looking directly at my left hand, and I felt the familiar weight of family scrutiny settling on my shoulders. This was the moment I'd been dreading since we'd boarded the plane in Seattle. "Thank you," I said simply. "It's quite striking," Victoria continued, her voice taking on the tone she used when she was building towards something. "Such an interesting setting. Very modern." I glanced at Marcus, who was watching this exchange with the careful attention of someone who understood exactly what was happening, but wasn't yet ready to show his hand. "Marcus designed it himself," I said, hoping to deflect the conversation. "Did he?" Victoria's eyebrows rose. "How talented. It must be nice to have such a creative partner." The pause before creative was deliberate, loaded with implications about the difference between creative work and serious business. And I realized that this was just the beginning. Victoria was testing the waters, establishing the dynamics that would define the next 3 days. What she didn't know was that Marcus had been preparing for this moment since our first conversation about my family, and the documentation sitting in his briefcase upstairs would soon turn her careful condescension into something much more complicated. Thanksgiving dinner at the Hartwell house was always a production worthy of a magazine spread. The formal dining room had been transformed with my mother's signature attention to detail: autumn-colored linens, centerpieces of carefully arranged boards and fall flowers, the family's Waterford crystal catching candlelight from silver candelabras that had belonged to my great-grandmother. I stood in the doorway for a moment, taking in the scene that had intimidated me as a child and still made my stomach flutter with anxiety. The mahogany table could seat 12, though tonight we were only 8. My parents, Victoria and Thornton, their children, Marcus and me. The children's table had been set up in the sunroom, a tradition that meant Madison and Prescott would eat quickly and then disappear to the playroom, leaving the adults to have what my mother called meaningful conversation. "Everything looks beautiful, Mom," I said, helping to carry serving dishes from the kitchen. "Thank you, darling. I do think the table turned out well this year." Catherine surveyed her work with satisfaction. "Victoria brought the most lovely wine from Greenwich. Apparently it's from some vineyard in Napa that Thornton's firm represents." Of course she did, I thought. Victoria had always excelled at bringing exactly the right gift, wearing exactly the right outfit, saying exactly the right thing to reinforce her position as the daughter who understood how things should be done. Marcus appeared beside me, carrying a platter of my mother's famous cornbread stuffing. "Need any help?" "You're a guest. You shouldn't be working." "In my family, guests who don't help with dinner don't get invited back," Marcus replied with a grin that made my mother actually giggle. "Besides, this gives me a chance to see how the masters do it. This spread is incredible." As we took our seats around the table, I found myself between Marcus and my father, directly across from Victoria. She'd changed for dinner into a burgundy silk blouse that perfectly complemented her blonde hair and made her look like she belonged in a Ralph Lauren advertisement. Thornton sat beside her in his navy blazer and perfectly knotted tie, even though this was supposedly a casual family dinner. "Shall we say grace?" my father asked, extending his hands to begin the circle that had been our tradition since childhood. As we bowed our heads,
I felt Marcus's hand warm and steady in mine, grounding me in a way that reminded me I wasn't the same uncertain girl who used to dread these family gatherings. I was a grown woman with her own life, her own accomplishments, and a partner who saw my worth even when I struggled to see it myself. Amen, my father concluded, and the familiar choreography of Hartwell Family Dinner began. For the first 20 minutes, conversation flowed along safe, predictable channels. My father discussed the pharmaceutical industry's response to new FDA regulations. Thornton shared updates from the investment world that sounded impressive but meaningless to anyone outside his profession. My mother asked polite questions about Marcus's business that he answered with just enough detail to sound successful without being boastful. Victoria had been unusually quiet, picking at her turkey and wine and observing Marcus with the intensity she usually reserved for analyzing market trends. I'd seen this look before. It was the expression she wore when she was gathering information for a strategic strike. "Marcus," she said suddenly, cutting into a conversation about Seattle's tech boom, "I've been curious about something. Elena's ring is so unusual. Where exactly did the stone come from?" The question landed in the middle of the table like a small bomb. My mother's fork paused halfway to her mouth. My father's eyebrows rose slightly. Thornton looked between Victoria and Marcus with the careful neutrality of someone who'd learned to stay out of his wife's confrontations. "I sourced it specifically for Elena. It's from a private collection." "How interesting," Victoria said, her voice taking on the syrupy tone she knew when she was preparing for attack. "A private collection. That sounds very exclusive." "It was important to find something worthy of Elena," Marcus said simply. Victoria set down her wineglass with deliberate precision. "Of course. It's just that, well, I've been looking at it all evening. And I have to say, the proportions seem a bit unusual for such a large center stone."
I felt heat creeping up my neck. "Victoria?" No, I'm not criticizing," she continued, waving her hand dismissively. "It's actually quite pretty, very flashy. It's just that I've spent years working with high net worth clients, and you develop an eye for these things. The way the light hits it, the color saturation, the band style, it all looks very much like the high-quality costume jewelry they make now. You can barely tell the difference from the real thing." The silence that followed was deafening. I stared at my sister, processing what she'd just said in front of my entire family. She had just called my engagement ring fake jewelry at Thanksgiving dinner in front of my fiancé. "Victoria," my mother said carefully, "that seems like an odd thing to comment on." "I'm just being honest," Victoria replied, her voice rising slightly. "Someone should tell Elena before she embarrasses herself. I mean, look at it objectively." She gestured toward my left hand. "A ring like that, if it were real, would cost more than most people's cars. And while I'm sure Marcus is successful in his boutique business, that level of expenditure seems unlikely for someone in custom jewelry retail." My father cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Victoria, perhaps—" "Dad, I'm trying to help," Victoria interrupted. "Elena's always been trusting, sometimes too trusting. Remember when she was 12 and believed that boy at summer camp when he said his father owned a movie studio? She wore that plastic premier necklace he gave her for months before we realized it came from a toy store." The comparison hit like a slap. Victoria had just compared my engagement ring to a 12-year-old's toy jewelry, and she'd done it by referencing one of my most embarrassing childhood memories. The summer camp incident had haunted me for years. The humiliation when other kids figured out the necklace was plastic, the way Victoria had announced it to the entire family at dinner, just like she was doing now. "That's enough," I said quietly, my voice shaking with anger. Elena, honey, I'm not trying to hurt your feelings, Victoria continued, her tone shifting to condescending sweetness. I'm trying to save you from a bigger embarrassment down the line. What happens when you go to get it insured and they tell you it's cubic zirconia? What happens when other people start noticing that the diamond doesn't sparkle quite right? Marcus had been listening to this exchange with perfect stillness, but I caught the slight tightening around his eyes that meant he was reaching the end of his patience. Victoria, he said, his voice calm, but carrying an edge I'd never heard before. I appreciate your concern for Elena, but I can assure you that her ring is exactly what it appears to be. Of course you'd say that, Victoria laughed, the sound sharp and dismissive. But Marcus, surely you understand that we're family, and family looks out for each other. Elena's always been a little naive about these things. Remember her first boyfriend in college? The one who told her he was practically royalty because his family owned a restaurant franchise? Victoria, stop, I said, my voice stronger now. I'm trying to help you. Elena's invested in this fantasy that she can't see reality anymore. Look at the facts. Mysterious boyfriend, no family background information, expensive-looking ring that appeared out of nowhere, vague answers about his business. If this were anyone else, we'd all be concerned about... That's enough. Marcus's voice cut through Victoria's monologue like a blade. He stood slowly, and suddenly the entire energy in the room shifted. Gone was the polite, accommodating man who'd been charming my family all evening. This was someone else entirely, someone with authority that filled the space around him.
Miss Whitfield, he said, his voice carrying a quiet menace that made everyone at the table freeze. You've spent the last 10 minutes insulting your sister, questioning my integrity, and demonstrating a remarkable combination of ignorance and cruelty. But more importantly, you've made assumptions about things you know nothing about. Victoria's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. She clearly hadn't expected Marcus to fight back. You want to discuss the ring? Marcus continued, reaching into his jacket pocket. Let's discuss the ring. He pulled out his phone and began typing with swift, deliberate movements. Elena's ring features a 3.2-carat oval-cut diamond, D-color, internally flawless, set in platinum with 0.8 carats with accent diamonds in a custom vine setting. The center stone was sourced from the Williamson Pink collection and has a complete gemological certificate from the Gemological Institute of America. The words hung in the air like an incantation. Victoria's face had gone pale. The setting was hand-forged in my private workshop by a master craftsman who has created pieces for European royalty. The total appraised value, as documented by 3 independent gemologists, is $340,000. My mother's wineglass hit the table with a sharp clink. My father made a small choking sound. Victoria looked like she'd been struck by lightning. But, more importantly, Marcus continued, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper, you just spent 10 minutes trying to destroy the confidence and happiness of one of the most remarkable women I've ever met, all because your ego couldn't handle the possibility that your sister might have something beautiful that you don't understand. He put his phone away and looked directly at Victoria. In 30 seconds, my jeweler is going to call with full documentation of every aspect of Elena's ring, and then you're going to have a choice about what kind of person you want to be for the rest of this evening. As if summoned by his words, Marcus's phone began to ring. The sound echoed through the silent dining room like a death knell for Victoria's confidence, and I realized that everything was about to change. Marcus answered his phone on the second ring, his voice carrying the crisp authority of someone accustomed to commanding attention. Adrian, he said, putting the call on speaker so the entire table could hear. Perfect timing. I'm here with Elena's family, and we're having a discussion about her ring. Could you provide the documentation we discussed? The voice that emerged from the phone speaker was cultured, precise, with the faint trace of a British accent. Of course, Mr. Chen, I have all the certificates here. Shall I read the specifications? Victoria's face had drained of all color. She sat frozen in her chair, staring at the phone like it might explode. Please, Marcus said, never taking his eyes off of my sister.
The center stone is a 3.2-carat oval brilliant diamond, D-color, internally flawless clarity grade. It was sourced from the estate collection of Lady Margaret Williamson and comes with full provenance documentation dating back to 1952. The stone was originally cut by Lawrence Graff himself and has been featured in 2 museum exhibitions. My mother's hand flew to her chest. Even I felt dizzy hearing these details for the first time. Lady Margaret Williamson. I knew that name from art history classes. She'd been one of the great jewelry collectors of the 20th century. The setting, Adrian continued, is platinum with 18 accent diamonds totaling 0.8 carats, all VS1 clarity or better. The design was hand-forged in our Beverly Hills atelier by Master Giovanni Benedetti, who has created pieces for the Danish royal family and 3 Academy Award winners. "And the current market value?" Marcus asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "The most recent appraisal, completed last month by Sotheby's for insurance purposes, valued the piece at $340,000. However, given the provenance and the master craftsmanship, the actual replacement value would likely exceed $400,000. The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the corner, the distant sound of Madison and Prescott playing in the sunroom, the soft whisper of autumn wind against the dining room windows, but at our table no one seemed to be breathing. Victoria's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. Thornton had gone very still, his investment banker's brain clearly calculating exactly what $340,000 meant in terms of Marcus's actual wealth and business success. "Thank you, Adrian," Marcus said conversationally, as if he hadn't just detonated a nuclear bomb at our family dinner table. "Adrian Thornfield. He's been the master gemologist at Chen Luxury Jewelers for 8 years. Before that, he spent 15 years at Tiffany & Company. He's one of the most respected jewelry appraisers on the West Coast." My mother found his voice first. "Did he say Giovanni Benedetti?" "You know the name?" Marcus asked. Yes, Margaret bought a Benedetti piece at auction last year, a bracelet that belonged to Grace Kelly. It sold for over $2 million. The number hung in the air like a verdict from my mother, who collected jewelry the way other people collected art, who knew every major designer and craftsman in the luxury market, had just confirmed that my ring was created by someone whose work sold for millions. Victoria finally managed to speak, her voice coming out as barely a whisper. I didn't know. I mean, how was I supposed to know?"
"You weren't supposed to know," I said, finding my voice for the first time since Marcus had answered his phone. "You were supposed to trust me. You were supposed to assume that your sister might actually know something about her own life, her own relationship, her own engagement ring. Elena, You were supposed to be happy for me," I continued, standing up from my chair. "You were supposed to see me wearing something beautiful and think, good for Elena, she deserves something wonderful. Instead, you saw something that didn't fit your narrow understanding of my life, and your first instinct was to tear it down." Tears were streaming down my face now, but they weren't tears of humiliation anymore. They were tears of rage, of years of accumulated hurt finally finding their voice. "Do you know what the worst part is?" I asked Victoria, who was still sitting frozen in her chair. "It's not that you called my ring fake. It's not even that you did it in front of everyone. It's that you were so sure I didn't deserve something beautiful that you couldn't imagine any other explanation." "Elena, please," Victoria said, her voice cracking. "I made a mistake. I'm sorry." "Are you? Are you really sorry? Or are you just sorry that you were wrong about the ring?" Victoria's silence was answer enough. Marcus stood beside me, his presence solid and reassuring. "Elena," he said gently, "why don't you tell your family about the ring? About why I chose it specifically for you?" I looked down at my left hand, where the diamond caught the candlelight from my mother's candelabras and threw tiny rainbows across the white tablecloth. For the first time since arriving in Connecticut, I felt proud instead of defensive. Marcus proposed on San Juan Island. We'd been hiking all day, and we found this secluded beach where we were completely alone. The sun was setting, and he got down on one knee right there on the sand. He told me that he'd been looking for the perfect stone for months, something with a history of strong women who'd made their mark on the world. Lady Margaret Williamson was a philanthropist who funded educational programs for women in developing countries. She believed that when you invest in a woman's potential, you change everything. My mother's eyes filled with tears. Oh, Elena. Marcus said he wanted me to carry that legacy forward, to remember every day that I'm part of a tradition of women who refuse to be small, who use their resources and their voices to lift other people up. I turned to look at Victoria. He chose this ring because he sees my work as important, as valuable, as worthy of something that beautiful. Victoria was crying now, makeup streaming down her cheeks in dark rivulets. Elena, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I didn't understand. But that's the problem, I said, my voice gentle but firm. You didn't try to understand. You saw something that challenged your assumptions about me, and instead of being curious or supportive, you tried to destroy it. The sound of gravel crunching in the driveway interrupted our conversation. Through the dining room windows, I could see headlights sweeping across the front lawn. That'll be Adrian, Marcus said, checking his watch. He made good time from the city. My father stood up abruptly. I should go. Should we prepare anything? Offer him dinner? The question revealed just how far outside my family's usual social sphere this situation had moved. My parents were accustomed to being the ones with connections, with access, with the ability to impress others. The idea that someone was coming to their house to provide authentication of their daughter's jewelry suggested a level of wealth and influence they hadn't anticipated. He's a professional making a house call, Marcus said kindly. Just treat him like any other business associate. Through the front windows, we watched a sleek, black Mercedes pull up behind our rental car. The man who emerged was tall, silver-haired, wearing a perfectly tailored charcoal suit despite the late hour. He moved with the careful precision of someone who handled million-dollar items on a daily basis. I'll get the door, my mother said, smoothing her hair nervously. Catherine, my father said quietly as she passed his chair. This changes things. What do you mean? I mean, our daughter is engaged to someone who casually flies master jewelers across the country to authenticate a $340,000 ring. This isn't boutique retail. This is serious wealth. The words hung in the air as my mother went to answer the door. Victoria was still crying silently, her perfect makeup ruined, her usual composure completely shattered. Thornton sat beside her looking shock-shelled, his investment banker's mind clearly struggling to recalibrate everything he had assumed about Marcus's business and resources. Elena, Victoria whispered, how do I fix this? How do I make this right? I looked at my sister, really looked at her for the first time in years. Without her usual armor of confidence and condescension, she looked smaller, more fragile, more human. I don't know if you can, I honestly said. Not tonight, anyway. Tonight, you're going to meet Adrian, you're going to see the documentation, and you're going to understand exactly how wrong you were, and then we're all going to figure out how to move forward from here. The sound of voices in the foyer announced Adrian's arrival. My mother's tone was unusually deferential, the way she spoke to the mayor or other important community figures. This way, Mr. Thornfield, everyone's in the dining room. As footsteps approached, Marcus squeezed my hand gently. Ready?
I looked around the table one more time, at my parents, who were seeing me clearly for the first time in years, at Thornton, who was recalculating everything he thought he knew about my life, at Victoria, who was about to face the full extent of her cruelty and ignorance. I'm ready, I said, and for the first time since arriving in Connecticut, I meant it completely. Adrian Thornfield entered our dining room like he was walking into a boardroom, carrying a sleek black leather portfolio that looked like it cost more than most people's monthly rent. He was exactly what I'd expected from his voice, distinguished, impeccably dressed, with the kind of quiet authority that came from years of handling priceless objects for the world's elite. Good evening, he said, his cultured voice filling the space with professional warmth. I apologize for the late hour, but Mr. Chen indicated this was somewhat urgent. My mother, who had followed him into the room, looked flustered in a way I'd rarely seen. Can I offer you coffee, water? We were just finishing dinner. Thank you, but I'm fine, Adrian replied graciously. I've driven down from the city specifically to examine Ms. Richardson's ring and provide documentation for your family. Shall we proceed?" The formal way he addressed me, Ms. Richardson, not Elena, sent a clear message about the level of respect and professionalism this examination would involve. This wasn't a casual favor. This was a serious business transaction. "Please, have a seat," my father said, gesturing toward the empty chair at the head of the table. Even he seemed uncertain about the protocol for the situation. Adrian set his portfolio on the table with careful precision and opened it to reveal an array of tools that looked like something from a high-tech laboratory. Jeweler's loops, digital calipers, what appeared to be a small spectrometer, and several other instruments I couldn't identify. Everything was nestled in custom foam padding and organized with military precision. "Before I begin," Adrian said, pulling on thin white gloves, "I should explain that this level of documentation is typically reserved for insurance appraisals, estate valuations, or option preparations. Mr. Chen has requested the most comprehensive analysis possible." He looked directly at Victoria, who had been trying to repair her makeup with a napkin, but still looked like she'd been crying for hours. "I understand there were some questions about the ring's authenticity?" Victoria's face flushed crimson. There was a misunderstanding." "I see." Adrian's tone was perfectly neutral, but somehow managed to convey exactly what he thought of anyone who would question a piece from Chen Luxury Jewelers. "Well, let's clear that up definitively." He turned to me with a professional smile. "Ms. Richardson, may I examine your ring?" I extended my left hand, surprised by how steady it was. After everything that had happened in the last hour, I felt oddly calm. The truth was about to be revealed in a way that left no room for doubt or interpretation. Adrian took my hand with the gentle care of someone who handled priceless objects daily. He positioned a high-powered LED light and began his examination with a jeweler's loupe, studying the ring from multiple angles. "Magnificent," he murmured after a moment. "The clarity is exceptional, even under 10x magnification. Not a single inclusion visible to the naked eye." He switched to a different loupe with higher magnification. "The cut is absolutely perfect. You can see Graf's signature faceting pattern here, the way he positioned the crown angles to maximize light return. Only a master cutter could achieve this level of precision." My mother leaned forward, fascinated despite the tension. "Can you tell who cut it just by looking?" "Lawrence Graf has a very distinctive style," Adrian explained, still examining the stone. "The proportions, the facet alignment, the way he handles the girdle thickness, it's like a signature. And this particular cut matches the documentation from the Williamson estate perfectly." He set down the loupe and reached for a small electronic device. "This is a diamond tester. It measures thermal conductivity to distinguish between natural diamonds and simulants. Not that there's any doubt in this case, but for complete documentation." The device beeped softly as he touched it to the stone. "Natural diamond, as expected. Now let's check the setting." Adrian examined the platinum band with the same meticulous attention. "The craftsmanship here is extraordinary. You can see Benedetti's hallmark here, stamped inside the band, GM for Giovanni Maestro. He only uses this mark on his finest pieces." He photographed the hallmark with a high-resolution camera, then took several more photos of the ring from different angles. "The accent diamonds are all perfectly matched in color and clarity. The mounting work is flawless, not a single tool mark visible. This represents hundreds of hours of hand labor by true masters." Thornton cleared his throat. "Mr. Thornfield, in your professional opinion, what would a ring like this sell for at auction?" Adrian considered the question carefully. Given the provenance, the master craftsmanship, and the exceptional quality of the center stone, I would estimate the auction value at $450,000 to $500,000. Possibly more if there was competitive bidding from collectors who understood the historical significance. The number hit the table like a physical blow. Victoria made a small, choking sound. My father's wine glass trembled in his hand. Even I felt dizzy. I'd known the ring was valuable, but $500,000 was beyond anything I had imagined. However, Adrian continued, Mr. Chen didn't purchase this ring. He created it specifically from his Richardson using a stone from his private collection and commissioning the setting from Benedetti personally. The sentimental value, combined with the custom nature of the piece, makes it essentially irreplaceable.
He opened his portfolio and withdrew a folder thick with documents. I have the complete documentation here. The original GIA certificate for the diamond, issued in 1952 when it was first set for Lady Margaret Williamson. The provenance chain showing its movement through 3 private collections before Mr. Chen acquired it in 2019. The commission agreement with Giovanni Benedetti, including his preliminary sketches for the setting design. Adrian spread the documents across the table like he was presenting evidence in a courtroom. Here's the insurance appraisal completed by Sotheby's last month. Here's the authenticity certificate from the Williamson estate. And here's the master craftsmanship documentation from Benedetti's workshop. My mother picked up the GIA certificate with trembling hands. 1952, she whispered. This diamond is older than I am. Lady Margaret Williamson was quite remarkable, Adrian said. She was one of the first women to serve on the board of a major bank, and she used her wealth to fund educational opportunities for women around the world. When she died in 2018, her jewelry collection was valued at over $50 million. And Marcus owns pieces from her collection? My father asked, his voice strained. Mr. Chen has been acquiring significant pieces from estate sales for several years. He believes important jewelry should be worn and appreciated, not locked away in bank vaults. When he decided to propose to Ms. Richardson, he wanted something with both beauty and meaning. I felt tears starting again, but these were different from the angry tears I'd shed earlier. These were tears of overwhelming gratitude and love for a man who had seen my worth so clearly that he'd chosen a ring with a story that matched my values. The sketches are particularly interesting, Adrian continued, opening a folder containing detailed drawings. Mr. Chen worked with Benedetti for 6 months to create a setting that would honor both the stone's history and Ms. Richardson's personality. The vine pattern represents growth and strength, while the accent diamonds are positioned to echo the educational work Lady Margaret supported. Victoria had been silent throughout the examination, but now she spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. 6 months? Yes, Mr. Chen contacted me about acquiring the stone over a year ago. He had been looking for something special, something with historical significance and exceptional beauty. When the Williamson piece became available, he knew immediately it was perfect for his intended purpose. The implication was clear. Marcus had been planning this proposal for over a year, carefully selecting and designing every element to create something meaningful and beautiful. The idea that this was some casual purchase from a jewelry store was now revealed as completely absurd. I have one final document, Adrian said, withdrawing a thick certificate from his portfolio. This is a letter of authenticity from the House of Chen, guaranteeing the ring's provenance and craftsmanship. It also includes a commitment to maintain and service the piece for its lifetime, ensuring it remains in perfect condition for future generations. He handed the letter to me, and I read the elegant calligraphy that confirmed everything he'd said. At the bottom was Marcus's signature alongside the official seal of Chen Luxury Jewelers. Ms. Richardson, Adrian said, beginning to pack up his instruments with the same careful precision he'd used to unpack them. You're wearing a piece of jewelry history. This ring represents the finest traditions of master craftsmanship, the legacy of a remarkable woman, and the love of a man who wanted to give you something worthy of your own remarkable character. He closed his portfolio and stood to leave. Mr. and Mrs. Hartwell, thank you for your hospitality. Ms. Whitfield, I hope this examination has been educational.
The dismissal in his tone was subtle but unmistakable. Adrian Thornfield had just delivered a masterclass in professionalism while simultaneously destroying any credibility Victoria might have had regarding jewelry evaluation. As my mother walked Adrian to the door, the dining room fell into complete silence. The documents lay spread across my mother's pristine tablecloth like evidence at a trial. Each certificate and photograph proving beyond any doubt that Victoria's accusations had not just been wrong, but spectacularly, embarrassingly wrong. Marcus reached for my hand, running his thumb gently over the ring that had caused so much drama. "Are you okay?" I looked around the table at my family, all of whom were staring at me with expressions ranging from amazement to shame. For the first time in my life, I was the one with something they didn't understand, something they had to respect. "I'm more than okay," I said, my voice steady and strong. "I'm exactly where I belong." The silence that followed Adrian's departure stretched for what felt like an eternity. The dining room, which had been filled with the warm sounds of family conversation just hours earlier, now felt like the aftermath of a natural disaster. The authentication documents lay scattered across my mother's pristine tablecloth like evidence at a crime scene. Each certificate and photograph proving beyond any doubt that Victoria's accusations had not just been wrong, but spectacularly, embarrassingly wrong. My sister sat frozen in her chair, staring at her hands as if they held answers to questions she didn't know how to ask. Her perfectly styled hair had come loose from its careful arrangement, and her makeup had given up any pretense of perfection. For the first time in childhood, Victoria looked genuinely vulnerable. "Well," my father said, finally, his voice carefully controlled, "that was illuminating." Thornton cleared his throat awkwardly. "Elena, I owe you an apology. We all do. I should have stopped Victoria when she called my engagement ring fake jewelry and suggested my fiancé was lying to me, when she compared me to a 12-year-old with toy necklaces, when she implied I was so desperate for love that I'd believe anything."
Each word landed like a physical blow. Thornton winced visibly, while my mother returned from seeing Adrian out, looking like she'd aged 5 years in the past hour. "Elena," my mother said softly, settling back into her chair, "we need to talk about all of this. About Marcus, about your life in Seattle, about—" She gestured helplessly toward the documents. "About everything we apparently don't know about our own daughter." "Do we?" I asked, surprised by how calm my voice sounded. "Because I've been trying to tell you about my life for years. I've talked about my work, my goals, my relationship with Marcus. But every time I shared something important, it got dismissed or minimized or turned into advice about what I should be doing differently." My father shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "That's not... We've always been supportive of your choices." "Have you?" I pulled out my phone and scrolled through our recent text conversations. "Last month, when I told you about the nonprofit winning a national award for community impact, Mom's response was, 'That's nice, dear. When are you coming home for a visit?' When I mentioned Marcus was taking me to meet his family in California, Dad asked if I was sure I was ready for such a serious relationship." I looked around the table, meeting each of their eyes. "You've been so convinced that my life was somehow lacking, somehow lesser than what you expected, that you couldn't see what was actually happening. And tonight, when Victoria attacked the most beautiful symbol of love I've ever received, you sat here and let it happen until Marcus proved you all wrong." "Elena, that's not fair," Victoria said, speaking for the first time since Adrian had left. Her voice was hoarse from crying. "I was trying to protect you." "From what? From happiness? From being loved by someone who sees my worth? From wearing something beautiful?" I stood up, no longer able to sit still. "Victoria, let me ask you something. When you saw my ring for the first time, what was your very first instinct?" Victoria looked confused by the question. What do you mean?"
Your first instinct, before you started analyzing it, before you started questioning its authenticity, what did you feel when you saw your little sister wearing something that beautiful? The question hung in the air, and I watched Victoria's face cycle through several emotions before settling on something that looked like shame. I was jealous, she whispered finally. I saw it and thought it was the most gorgeous ring I'd ever seen, and my first thought was that it couldn't be real, because if it was real, that meant you had something I didn't, something better than anything I'd ever owned. The honesty of the admission shocked everyone at the table, including Victoria herself. She looked up at me with tears streaming down her face. I couldn't stand the idea that my little sister, who I've always thought of as the one who needed guidance, who made impractical choices, I couldn't stand that you might have found something I hadn't. Someone who loved you more than Thornton loves me. A life that was more meaningful than mine. The words tumbled out like a confession that had been building for years. You moved across the country and built something from nothing. You're helping people every day. You found a man who spent a year planning the perfect proposal because he wanted to honor your values and your work. And I've been so focused on having the right life, the life that looks perfect from the outside, that I forgot to build a life that actually means something. Thornton reached for Victoria's hand, but she pulled away. No, I need to say this. Thornton is a wonderful husband and father, but he proposed with a ring he picked out in 20 minutes at Tiffany's because it was the appropriate size for someone at his level in the firm. There was no thought about what it meant to me. No consideration of my personality or my dreams. It was just appropriate. She looked down at her own engagement ring, a classic solitaire that probably cost more than most people's cars, but suddenly looked generic compared to the unique artistry of mine. And tonight, when I saw Elena wearing something that was obviously created specifically for her, something with history and meaning and beauty that took a year to plan, I couldn't handle it. So I tried to tear it down. I tried to make her feel small so I could feel better about my own choices. The admission created a strange vacuum in the room. Victoria had just articulated the family dynamic that had shaped our entire relationship, the unspoken assumption that she was the successful sister and I was the one who needed managing. My mother broke the silence. Victoria, honey. Mom, don't. Victoria held up her hand. Don't try to make this better. I need to own this. She turned to Marcus, who had been watching this confession with the careful attention of someone trying to understand complex family dynamics. Marcus, I owe you the biggest apology. I questioned your integrity, your business, your love for Elena. I tried to undermine your relationship based on nothing but my own insecurity and ignorance. There's no excuse for that. Marcus nodded gravely. Victoria, I appreciate the apology, but the person you really hurt tonight was Elena. I know. Victoria turned to me, her face raw with emotion. Elena, I don't know how to fix this. I don't know how to undo what I said or how I made you feel. I've been a terrible sister for so long that I'm not sure I remember how to be a good one.
I looked at Victoria, really looked at her, and saw something I'd never seen before. Not the polished, successful older sister who always had the right answer, but a woman who was genuinely lost, who had built her entire identity around external markers of success, and was just now realizing how empty that felt. Victoria, I said softly, do you want to know something? Before tonight, before all of this happened, I would have traded my life for yours in a heartbeat. Her eyes widened in surprise. I looked at your house, your job, your perfect family, the way Mom and Dad talked about your accomplishments, and I felt like such a failure. I thought maybe I'd made all the wrong choices. Maybe I was the disappointment daughter who'd never measure up. I sat back down, feeling emotionally exhausted, but oddly relieved. But tonight, when you attacked my ring, when you tried to diminish the most meaningful thing in my life, I realized something. You can't take away what Marcus and I have built together. You can't diminish the work I do or the lives I've helped change. You can't make me feel small anymore unless I let you." My father cleared his throat. "Elena, we owe you an apology too. Your mother and we've been so focused on what we thought success should look like that we missed what you were actually accomplishing." "The nonprofit," my mother added. "Tell us about it. Really tell us. Not the summary version you give at family dinners, but what you actually do every day." So I did. For the next hour, I told them about the women I'd helped start businesses. About Maria, who went from cleaning offices at night to running her own catering company that now employed 15 people. About Jennifer, whose tech startup was revolutionizing accessibility software. About the microloan program that had funded over 200 small businesses in the past 3 years. I told them about the 12-hour days, the grant applications, the business plans I'd helped write, the mentoring sessions that sometimes lasted until midnight. I told them about the satisfaction of watching someone realize their own potential, the pride I felt when a client landed their first major contract, the way my work had given me purpose I'd never found in any traditional career path. As I talked, I watched my parents' expressions change, from polite interest to genuine amazement. They were seeing me clearly for the first time in years, understanding that what they'd viewed as an impractical career choice was actually meaningful work that was changing lives. 300 women, my mother repeated when I finished. "Elena, that's extraordinary." "Why didn't you tell us all of this before?" my father asked. "I tried," I said simply. "But every time I brought up my work, the conversation shifted to when I was going to find a more stable job, or whether I was saving enough for retirement, or why I didn't move back to Connecticut where I could be closer to family. It felt like you saw my choices as problems to be solved rather than accomplishments to be celebrated." The recognition on their faces was painful to watch. They were realizing that they'd spent years missing the most important parts of their daughter's life because they'd been too focused on what they thought her life should look like. Marcus squeezed my hand gently. "Elena has built something remarkable," he said. "When I met her, I was immediately struck by her passion and her competence. She's one of the most impressive people I know." And Marcus supports the foundation, not just financially, though he's been incredibly generous, but strategically. He's helped me think through expansion plans, introduced me to potential partners, provided business advice when I needed it. He sees my work as important. Victoria wiped her eyes with her napkin. "I can see why you love him." "Can you?" I asked her. "Because a few hours ago you were suggesting he was lying to me about basic facts of our relationship." The reminder of her earlier accusations made Victoria flinch. "Elena, I know I can't take back what I said tonight, but I want you to know that seeing you with Marcus, hearing about your work, understanding what you've built, I'm proud of you. I should have said that years ago, but I'm saying it now." It wasn't enough to undo the damage of the evening, but it was a start. For the first time in our adult lives, Victoria was seeing me as an equal, rather than the little sister who needed guidance from her own poor judgment. As we finally began clearing the dishes from our interrupted dinner, I realized that everything had changed. The family dynamics that had shaped my entire life had been permanently altered by one evening's confrontation. I was no longer the disappointing daughter or the sister who needed protection from her own poor judgment. I was Elena Richardson, successful nonprofit director, engaged to a remarkable man, wearing a ring that represented both history and hope. And for the first time in my life, my family was going to have to figure out how to relate to me as the strong, accomplished woman I'd become. The next morning dawned gray and cold, typical November weather in Connecticut that matched the subdued atmosphere in the Hartwell house. I woke up in my childhood bedroom, surrounded by the faded remnants of my teenage years, honor roll certificates, debate team trophies, and photos from high school that felt like artifacts from someone else's life. Marcus was already awake, sitting by the window with his laptop handling business calls with his characteristic efficiency. The sight of him in my childhood space felt surreal.
This successful, sophisticated man who'd chosen to love me, conducting multi-million-dollar business from a room that still had my old soccer participation ribbons pinned to a cordboard. "Good morning," he said softly, ending his call. "How did you sleep?" "Surprisingly well," I admitted, stretching. "I thought I'd be up all night replaying everything that happened." "Processing trauma takes energy," Marcus observed. "Sometimes exhaustion is the only thing that lets us rest." Downstairs, the kitchen was unusually quiet. Normally, my mother would be bustling around, preparing an elaborate breakfast. But this morning, she sat at the kitchen table with a single cup of coffee, staring out the window with an expression I couldn't read. "Morning, Mom," I said, pouring coffee for Marcus and myself. "Elena," she looked up with a weary smile. "I've been thinking about last night. About a lot of things, actually." "What kind of things?" She gestured for us to sit down. "About how completely wrong I've been about your life. About the assumptions I've made. About—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "About how I failed you as a mother." The words hit me unexpectedly hard. "Mom, you didn't fail me." "Didn't I?" Her voice was quiet, reflective. "Elena, last night I watched a stranger, Adrian, show more respect for your accomplishments in 1 hour than I've shown in 5 years. I listened to your sister tear you down while I sat there worrying about dinner getting cold instead of defending you. I've spent so long trying to mold you into what I thought you should be that I never celebrated who you actually are." Marcus reached for my hand under the table, his touch grounding me as emotions I didn't expect began surfacing. "Do you know what really opened my eyes?" my mother continued. "It wasn't the ring or the money or even Adrian's presentation. It was watching Marcus defend you. The way he spoke about your work, about your character, about your worth. He sees you the way a mother should see her daughter, with complete pride and admiration." She turned to Marcus. "You protected her in a way I should have been protecting her all along." Before Marcus could respond, Victoria appeared in the doorway, looking like she hadn't slept at all. Her usually perfect appearance was replaced by sweatpants and a Yale hoodie, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. Without makeup, the resemblance between us was stronger than I'd noticed in years. "Elena," she said hesitantly, "can we talk? Privately?" I glanced at Marcus, who nodded encouragingly. We walked out to the sunroom where we'd eaten countless breakfasts as children, settling into the wickered chairs that had been there since we were teenagers. "I kept thinking about what you said last night," Victoria began without preamble, "about how you would have traded your life for mine. And I realized something that's been eating at me all night." She pulled her knees up to her chest, looking more like the sister I remembered from childhood than the polished investment banker she had become. "Elena, I've been jealous of you our entire lives." The statement was so unexpected that I actually laughed. "Jealous of me? Victoria, you're the one with the perfect life. The career, the husband, the house in Greenwich, the kids in private school. You're the daughter Mom and Dad brag about to their friends. But you're the daughter they actually love," Victoria said quietly. The words hung between us like a bridge I'd never known existed. "What do you mean?" Victoria was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the frost-covered garden. "Do you remember when you were 16 and you got into that car accident? You'd been driving to your volunteer shift at the animal shelter, and that drunk driver ran the red light?" I nodded. It had been one of the scariest moments of my teenage years. Not because of my injuries, which were minor, but because of how terrified my parents had been. I was home from college for the weekend, and when Dad got the call from the hospital, I watched him completely fall apart. I'd never seen him cry before, Elena. Never. But he sobbed in the kitchen while Mom called everyone to cancel their plans so they could rush to the hospital. And she turned to look at me directly.
And I remember thinking, they would never cry like that for me. If I got hurt, they'd be concerned, they'd handle it efficiently, they'd do everything right, but they wouldn't fall apart because they couldn't imagine a world without me. The revelation was staggering. All these years, I thought I was the disappointing daughter, the one who didn't meet expectations. Victoria, it gets worse. Do you know what I did while they were at the hospital with you? I went through Dad's home office. I looked at his financial records, his investment accounts, his will. My stomach dropped. Why? Because I wanted to see if the money was divided equally between us, if maybe the favoritism I'd always felt was just in my head. She laughed bitterly. But it wasn't equal, Elena. You're getting more. Not just the inheritance, but the family business shares, the house, everything significant. I stared at her, processing this information. I had no idea. Of course you didn't, because you never had to think about competing for their love. You just had it, automatically, completely. And I've spent my entire adult life trying to earn what you were born with. The pieces of our family dynamic were rearranging themselves in my mind, forming a picture I'd never seen before. All of Victoria's accomplishments, her need to be perfect, her constant commentary on my choices, it all made sense now. That's why you attacked my ring. Understanding flooding through me. It wasn't just jealousy about the jewelry. It was proof that someone sees me the way you've always wanted Mom and Dad to see you.
Victoria nodded, tears starting again. Marcus looks at you the way Dad looks at you, like you're precious, like losing you would destroy him. And Thornton loves me, but it's a practical love. I'm a good investment, a suitable wife for someone at his level, but he's never looked at me like I'm irreplaceable. The comparison was heartbreaking because I could see the truth in it. Thornton was a good man, but their relationship had always felt more like a merger than a romance. Victoria, I'm so sorry. I never knew you felt that way. How could you? I've been so busy maintaining the perfect facade that I never told anyone how empty it felt inside. She wiped her eyes with the sleeve of her hoodie. And last night, watching you with Marcus, seeing how he talks about your work, understanding that you've built something meaningful while I've just been accumulating status symbols, it broke something in me. We sat in silence for a moment, both of us processing 30 years of misunderstood family dynamics. What do you want to do about it? I asked finally. I don't know, Victoria admitted. For the first time in my life, I don't have a plan. I don't know how to fix my marriage or find work that means something, or figure out who I am when I'm not being perfect. Maybe that's the point, I suggested gently. Maybe you need to stop being perfect and start being real. I don't know how to do that. Neither did I until I moved to Seattle and started over. Maybe you need your own version of starting over. Victoria looked at me with an expression of genuine curiosity. What would that even look like? I don't know, but Victoria, you're incredibly smart and capable. If you put half the energy you've spent on maintaining appearances into finding something you actually care about, you could do anything. Would you help me? The question was tentative, vulnerable in a way I'd never heard from my sister. Help you how? I don't know yet, but Elena, I want to understand your work. I want to know how you found something that gives your life meaning. I want to learn how to build relationships that aren't based on competition or status. The request was so unexpected that I almost didn't know how to respond. Victoria was asking me to teach her how to live authentically, the same Victoria who'd spent years criticizing my choices. Of course I'll help. But Victoria, this isn't going to be easy. Finding your authentic self means giving up the version of yourself that everyone expects you to be. It means disappointing people who have specific ideas about who Victoria Whitfield should be. I know, and honestly, that terrifies me. But Elena, I can't keep living like this. I can't keep pretending that having the right life is the same as having a good life. We were interrupted by Marcus appearing in the doorway. Sorry to interrupt, but Elena, you have a call. It's someone named Jennifer Martinez from your foundation board. I glanced at my phone and realized it was already past 10, later than I'd ever slept during a work week. I should take this call. It might be about the grant application we submitted last month. But as I stood to take the call, Victoria caught my arm. Elena, wait. Whatever this call is about, whatever opportunities your work is creating, I want you to know that I'm proud of you. I should have said that years ago, but I'm saying it now. The words I'd waited my entire life to hear from my sister finally came, and they meant more than any ring or documentation ever could. Thank you, I said simply. That means everything to me. As I walked toward the house to take the call, I realized that the confrontation over my ring had done more than just reveal its value. It had forced my entire family to confront truths we'd all been avoiding for years. And maybe finally we could start building relationships based on who we actually were instead of who we thought we should be. The phone call that interrupted my conversation with Victoria turned out to be more significant than I could have imagined. Jennifer Martinez, the chair of our foundation board, was calling with news that would change everything about my work and my future. Elena, are you sitting down? Because I have news that's going to blow your mind. I gestured to my family that this might take a while and stepped onto the back porch for privacy. What's going on, Jennifer? The MacArthur Foundation called this morning, Elena. You've been selected for a MacArthur Fellowship. You're receiving a MacArthur Genius Grant. The words didn't compute at first. I stood frozen on the porch, watching November wind scatter the last autumn leaves across my parents' perfectly manicured lawn. I'm sorry, what? A MacArthur Fellowship, Elena. $800,000 over 5 years, no strings attached, to continue your work with women entrepreneurs. They specifically cited your innovative approach to sustainable business development and your measurable impact on community economic growth. My legs gave out and I sank into one of the wicker chairs where Victoria and I had just been having the most honest conversation of our lives. The MacArthur Fellowship, the so-called Genius Grant, was the most prestigious recognition anyone in nonprofit work could receive. I'm sorry. Are you absolutely sure? This isn't some kind of mistake. Completely sure. The announcement goes public next Monday, but they wanted to give you advance notice. Elena, do you understand what this means? You're about to become one of the most recognized philanthropists in the country. The credibility this brings, the doors it opens, the funding opportunities. As Jennifer continued talking about the implications, I looked through the kitchen window and saw my family gathered around the table. My parents, Marcus, Victoria, even Thornton and the kids. They were talking animatedly, probably still processing everything that had happened the night before. 24 hours ago, I'd walked into this house feeling like the disappointing daughter, worried about their reaction to my life choices. Now I was sitting outside that same house as a MacArthur Fellow, one of 25 people nationwide selected for extraordinary creativity and potential. Elena, are you still there? Yes, sorry, I'm just processing. Jennifer, can I call you back later today? I'm with my family and this is... Of course. But Elena, congratulations. This recognition is so well deserved. Your work is changing lives, and now the whole world is going to know it. After I hung up, I sat on the porch for a few more minutes, letting the magnitude of the news settle. The MacArthur Fellowship wasn't just an award. It was validation of everything I'd built, everything I'd sacrificed to pursue work that mattered to me. When I finally went back inside, Marcus took one look at my face and immediately stood up. What happened? You look like you've seen a ghost. Not a ghost, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. A future I never imagined possible. I told him about the MacArthur Fellowship, watching their expressions change from confusion to amazement to something approaching awe. My father, who'd spent my entire adult life worrying about my financial stability, sat in stunned silence as I explained that I'd just been given $800,000 to continue my work. "Elena," my mother said, her voice thick with emotion, "this is extraordinary. We're so proud of you." "A MacArthur Fellowship," my father repeated, shaking his head in disbelief. "Elena, do you understand how rare this is? How prestigious?" Victoria had been quiet during my announcement, but now she spoke up with genuine wonder in her voice. "Elena, this means you're officially a genius. Like, literally, that's what they call MacArthur Fellows." "It means my work matters," I corrected gently. "It means the foundation can expand in ways I never thought possible." Marcus pulled me into his arms, spinning me around the kitchen with joy that was infectious. "Elena, this is incredible. You deserve this recognition and so much more." As the excitement settled, I realized that this moment, standing in my childhood kitchen surrounded by family who was finally seeing me clearly, engaged to a man who'd always believed in my potential, this was what happiness felt like when you stopped apologizing for taking up space. "There's something else," I said, looking specifically at Victoria. "Jennifer mentioned that part of the fellowship includes opportunities to mentor other emerging leaders in nonprofit work. Victoria, if you're serious about finding more meaningful work, this could open doors we never imagined." Victoria's eyes widened. "You would do that? After everything I said last night?" "Victoria, what you said last night was awful. But what you said this morning was honest. And I'd rather have an honest sister who's trying to grow than a perfect sister who's dying inside." The moment was interrupted by Thornton clearing his throat. "Elena, I owe you an apology too. I sat there last night and let Victoria—" He struggled with the words. "I should have stopped her. I should have defended you." "Thornton, you were in an impossible position. Victoria is your wife, and family dynamics are complicated." "No," he said firmly. "There's no excuse for letting someone attack your character like that. And Elena, after hearing about your work, about what you've accomplished, I'm embarrassed that I didn't know any of this about my sister-in-law." He turned to Victoria. "We need to talk about a lot of things." Victoria nodded, looking both nervous and relieved. "We do." My mother stood up suddenly. "I have something I need to do," she announced, disappearing upstairs. She returned a few minutes later carrying a small velvet box that I recognized from her jewelry collection. "Elena," she said, opening the box to reveal a delicate diamond necklace. "This belonged to your great-grandmother. I've been saving it well, I thought I was saving it for the right occasion, but I realize now that the right occasion isn't some future event. It's now. It's recognizing who you've become and celebrating what you've accomplished." She fastened the necklace around my neck, her hands gentle and reverent. "Your great-grandmother would be so proud of you. She was a woman ahead of her time, too. She started the first women's business association in this town in 1945. The necklace felt like a blessing, a connection to the women in my family who'd also chosen to build something meaningful with their lives. Now I want to hear everything about your foundation. Not the polite dinner conversation version, but everything. I want to understand the work my daughter is being recognized for at the national level." So I told them, really told them, about the late nights writing grant proposals, the joy of watching a client land her first major contract, the frustration of bureaucratic obstacles, the satisfaction of measurable impact. I told him about Maria's catering company that now employed 20 people, about Jennifer's tech startup that had just secured Series A funding, about the microloan program that had a 94% repayment rate. As I talked, I watched my parents' understanding deepen. They were seeing me not as their daughter who'd made unconventional choices, but as a professional who'd built something remarkable. "The expansion plans," Marcus added, "include opening offices in 5 more cities over the next 3 years. Elena's work is becoming a national model for sustainable economic development. And the MacArthur Fellowship will fund research into scaling the program internationally. We're looking at pilot programs in Guatemala and Kenya." My father leaned back in his chair, shaking his head in amazement. Elena, I owe you an enormous apology. I've been treating you like a child playing at charity work when you're actually running a sophisticated operation that's changing lives on multiple continents. Dad, you didn't know because I didn't explain it well. I was so defensive about your potential criticism that I never gave you the chance to understand and support what I was doing. Still, he said, a father should know when his daughter is doing extraordinary work. I should have asked better questions, paid closer attention. As the afternoon wore on, something shifted in our family dynamic that felt permanent. The hierarchy that had placed Victoria at the top and me somewhere below had been completely reorganized. Not because Victoria had fallen, but because I'd finally allowed myself to rise to my actual level. When evening came and it was time for Marcus and me to head back to Seattle, the goodbyes felt different than any family departure I'd experienced. My parents hugged me with genuine pride, asking detailed questions about my upcoming projects and making me promise to keep them updated on the MacArthur Fellowship developments. Victoria's goodbye was the most significant. She pulled me aside as we were loading our bags into the rental car. Elena, I meant what I said about wanting your help finding something meaningful to do. Would you consider letting me volunteer with the foundation? Maybe I could use my finance background to help with the business development side. The request was so humble, so different from the sister who'd attacked my choices just 24 hours earlier that I almost didn't recognize her. Victoria, I would love that, but you need to be sure this is what you want, not just what you think will repair things between us. I'm sure, she said firmly. Elena, watching you talk about your work today, seeing the impact you're having, I want to be part of something that matters. I want to learn how to build instead of just accumulate. As we drove away from the house where I'd grown up feeling inadequate, I looked down at my left hand where Lady Margaret Williamson's diamond caught the late afternoon sun. The ring that had caused so much drama was actually the least remarkable thing about my life, which is exactly how it should be. So, Marcus said as we headed toward the airport, how does it feel to go home as a MacArthur Fellow engaged to a man who adores you, instead of leaving as the disappointing daughter? I considered the question seriously. It feels like I finally know who I am, and more importantly, I finally know I don't need anyone else's permission to be her. 6 months later, Victoria took a leave of absence from her investment banking job to complete a certification program in nonprofit management. She now runs the East Coast expansion of my foundation, bringing the same intensity she once applied to financial markets to the work of helping women build sustainable businesses. My parents became 2 of our most active board members, using their Connecticut connections to open doors and secure funding. My father's pharmaceutical industry knowledge proved invaluable when we started working with healthcare entrepreneurs. And the ring? It sits on my finger every day, a reminder not of its monetary value, but of the love story it represents. One where I never had to make myself smaller to be cherished, where my ambitions were celebrated instead of managed, where I was seen as worthy of something beautiful simply because of who I am. Sometimes the best revenge against people who try to diminish you isn't proving them wrong about what you have. It's proving them wrong about who you are. And who I am, it turns out, is exactly who I was meant to be all along. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.